Thank you for being here today. I appreciate you being here and taking the time to learn about me and why I'm running. I am a member of the chamber here. I do have a startup company, Reno+, Sports, which we are now working with UNR Athletics on name, image, and likeness opportunities for the basketball team. We'll begin working with the football team very soon. I've been in Nevada for about 20 years. Bless you.
Thank you.
I'm an attorney. I've worked the last 14 years with Andre Agassi and Stephanie Graff on everything that they do, from their business investments to the charitable foundations, both here and in Germany. But about a year ago, 18 months ago, I decided to run for Secretary of State. I had the opportunity, one, being an attorney and doing all the corporate filings at Agassi, I got to learn about silver flume and understand how lovely silver flume is. And the nerdy side of me was like, this could be better. It should be better. Andre and Stephanie can afford an attorney to do all the corporate filings. There's so many small businesses, especially going through the startup process, that it's hard, and you shouldn't have to hire an attorney to do that process. Yes, I can understand some initial corporate filing forms, but on an annual basis, you should not need an attorney to do a name change, address change, or simple just filing changes or amendments that you need to make. And then the month of February, the entire system was down. I just thought, from a business perspective, this makes no sense whatsoever. And I started asking questions and started learning how this was truly impacting some of our Nevada businesses. Nevada attorneys were getting frustrated and referring their clients to Wyoming. I just thought, this isn't good. And I started researching more. Silver Flume system generates about $200 million on an annual basis to the general fund. It's the third largest contributor. And when we need to invest in our social services or our programs or our infrastructure, that revenue is pretty important. If we're going to continue to invest in programs that we find as priority for them, we have to have a revenue source to be able to fund those programs. And Silver Flume is a major part of that. But we can't continue to do it if we're going to lose market share. And I know fees are a discussion, but at the same time, if you're going to charge a high fee and not provide quality services, we're hitting people double and hard. So I don't know if that's a word, but I just made it up. And I thought we could do better. We could simplify this. We can do it, and started asking questions. I also had the opportunity to start a really unique school in North Las Vegas, in one of our most vulnerable neighborhoods. It's called Cristo Rey St. Vitus. The Cristo Rey movement started in Chicago about 40 years ago. It's for low-income neighborhoods that are struggling to find quality educational opportunities. I was a kid who grew up in a household whose parents weren't educated. My mom graduated from high school. She was pregnant with my older brother. My father worked 3 jobs for our family. And they always stress the importance of education. I wouldn't be where I am today or have the opportunities I have today if it wasn't for my education. And so education became a big priority of mine, and seeing our kids struggle through COVID and then seeing the 2020 election, but I'm going to go back a little bit. This Cristo Rey movement is really unique in that we set up a school and an employment agency. So every kid goes to school 4 days a week, and they work 1 day a week in a professional office environment, and it's exposing kids like me to environments they may not know exist. Our kids are working in the MGM executive offices. They're working in a ton of law firms. They're working for general contractors. A couple of the kids are working for a federal judge in his chambers and helping him. It's incredible what they're doing. And I just thought, we can't continue to fight the education fight if we're not going to have access to the ballot box or give these parents an opportunity to exercise their vote. I think our greatest fundamental right is that fundamental right to vote, because every freedom we take for granted or we depend on every day runs through the ballot box, and we need to protect that. I'm going to refer to Clark, and I apologize. But Clark County is the 5th largest school district in the country. It's majority minority, and those are the parents we need to get to the polls if we're going to hold our educational systems accountable for their outcomes. Or if we're going to talk about investment in our public education system, it's those parents we're going to require to get out there to make that vote, because they have the most vested interest in the outcome. And I thought, I can't continue to do the education work if we're not going to give people access to the ballot box, or we're going to prevent them from having that access. So Nevada, I think, has done a great job in the last 2 legislative cycles in increasing access. We can have a discussion about what's good and what's bad. And I think we're on the right trajectory, and we can always review it and increase our systems and processes to make them better and stronger and more secure. But again, we've got to start from a basic level. And with that understanding, that was the fight I wanted to have. I was like, I will fight to protect everybody's access, no matter if you're a Republican, you're a Democrat, or you're nonpartisan. We should have fair rules. Our system should be secure, and we should fight every day to make sure everybody has an opportunity to access the ballot box. So with that, I decided to run for Secretary of State. I've been working the last 18 months to make that a reality. And it's hard, it's tough, but the greatest opportunity is you get to learn so much about our state. You get to learn about the business side of things. You get to learn about the social side of things. You get to learn about issues in the South, issues in the North, and how different we are as a state. But in reality, I think we all come together as one Nevada, and we all have to have a shared vision if we're going to continue to advance as a state. I'm here to answer questions. That's me. That's why I'm running. I know it's short and sweet, but I'd rather hear from you than you hear from me and discuss the issues that are important to you.
I have a question. What do you think is the greatest challenge to them access to vote?
Voter confidence. I think we have to do, look, Barbara Sagasti, I believe has done a great job in protecting all of our right to vote. She's run that office in a way that's been in the best interest of all Nevadans and has put party secondary to anything that she's done. And I think the secretary has to continue to run the office that way. It really should be a nonpartisan office. And as a regulator, you are a regulator of elections. It is your job to understand what the rules are, to set the boundaries and make sure everybody's following the rules on the same side. I was a former regulator. I served on the Nevada Athletic Commission. I served for 2 years as chair. And that's a hard job because it's hard, one, to get everybody to understand what the rules are and how to operate within the rules. And it's even harder to hold people accountable when they step outside the boundary that is acceptable. But you have to do it in a nonpartisan way. You have to do it impartially and look at the facts and the content and then make a decision. So voter confidence, again, go back to the statement is we've got to get people to understand how secure our elections are. If there any CEO in any business is constantly looking at their systems and processes to say, how can we be better? What do we need to do better? That's no different in voting. I know we have a lot of new initiatives, but it's time to go back and review and say, okay, what did we do well? Where could we do some work and start to really focus on that? And a lot of times the Secretary of State has to listen. There's going to be times when you're going into environments where it's going to be hard and tough. You're going to hear a lot of things, but you got to take it and you got to figure out how do we all come to the center to be able to find the solution that we all agree on. It's being pragmatic.
So I have kind of a hypothetical thing, since you're not in the office yet. If you were Secretary of State and you were looking across the landscape of Nevada right now, a lot of the rural counties, one of them in particular, has actually voted to go just hand count the ballots. How would you, as the Secretary of State, try to address what could very well be 17 different voices for one election?
It's a good question. Obviously, there's an update on Knight County. They are going to do paper ballots in Knight County, but it's going to be secondary to the actual use of the actual system that they have. So it's not going to be one system or the other. They're going to implement both. And it's basically they're doing an audit of the computer system with the paper ballots in Knight County to make sure that they are in sync. And if there's a discrepancy, then we'll figure out what the process is at that point.
That's interesting, just because Dean Heller was the one that ensured that there was a paper trail next year ballot to do exactly this. Correct. We were the first one.
Yeah. So I think the legislature heard what Knight County is progressing to do, and I think the clerk there then realized what implications that could have on the county. And I think they quickly realized that they needed to simultaneously do both. 17 different opinions. Obviously, that's typical, I think, in politics. 80% of the population and probably 95% is within 2 counties. And so it's understanding some of the fiscal responsibility. Yes, we can all dream about what we want to do in our individual communities, but then you have to understand the fiscal implications of it all and what is possibility and what is not. And I think understanding these are the benefits of having this policy argument, but then also too, there's the fiscal side of it and how do we merge the two to come out with the best outcome. And it's just, again, it's listening, trying to wrangle everybody into, I like to think of the individual counties as individual promoters within the fight game. They hate each other sometimes, love each other, they have difference of opinions, but it's figuring out where's that middle ground and coming together. Look, you may think I'm being a little naive, but you've got to be optimistic about what you're going to do. If you go in this with a predetermined notion or a preconceived idea of what you want to accomplish, I think you're in the wrong position.
You thought about how to get more people to vote.
Yes.
And what, because it's always discouraging to see how many people actually don't go to the polls. What could be done about that?
It was a good question because I actually did an interview today with the sagebrush at UNR. And they ask a very similar question: why should college students care, and how do we get them motivated to vote? I think you got to start with the younger generation, and especially the high school kids. Start with civic engagement, understanding responsibility, and how we can impact their lives going forward. And saying the power to vote is so critical to what you want this community to be, what you want your state to look like, and you can have an influence. And what I explained to the student was, because each of these races is within the margin of error, the student population could actually determine the outcome of these races by 1%. They're a small population, but they could be a mighty force in this voting cycle. I said, if you don't participate in the voting process and you don't exercise that fundamental right, the elected officials are not going to listen to your voice, or they're going to have an understanding what your priorities are, and you're going to get very frustrated. So if you start that engagement early and you start exercising that right, and you start expressing your opinion and your values, they will start to listen, and you'll start to see the government you want to see. I think it starts at young civic engagement, and then those kids also too go home and talk to their families and ask questions. And the fact that they're asking questions, I think, motivates the parents and it motivates the rest of the family. So, yes.
But in context, right, thinking about both young people and people who are working, right? Let's say your job will not let you get to the polls in time. Let's say you have assignments and exams that day, all day. What will make them go? You know, so for me, an idea that I have is like, why don't we have, you know, election day off? It should be off. Why? Because we need to participate in these elections so that our voices are heard. But that's quite literally a systemic barrier within both young people and working class people, right? We're talking about they're the most affected, but they're not the ones who are being brought to the table because there are barriers for them to be able to do that. So what are the solutions to that? Because, you know, like what you said, you're idealistic, you're optimistic, but it is idealistic because if your goal to go into university is to get the degree and voting, you want to vote too, but right now your main goal is to get your degree, what do you think is going to come first? Same with like working parents, right? Or just working class citizens in general. If it wasn't for the fact that I worked in government, right, I wouldn't have the same access if I was a regular person. And especially people who are, you know, who are poor, who live in communities where they don't have a car, where their only transportation is public transportation, and both is problematic in both northern Nevada and southern Nevada, right? There's a lack of access to a lot of these things. How do we create that access?
One is you continue to have what legislation are doing us. One is mail ballot access. Every eligible Nevadan gets a ballot, so that's one point of access. Two is continue to have our early voting. That's, you know, 2 weeks of available access by showing up at a poll if you wish to vote in person, and then actually having election day. So making sure that we continue to have those three components is critical to that access point. So, but I don't disagree with you on the holiday for voting. That's absolutely a great idea. And I keep saying this to everybody. I know my opponent would like to eliminate all of those access points and have a single day of voting. And my response consistently is Nevada is a working class community. We are a 24/7 community. Some people work, their shift is 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., which is a voting day, and they can't take that time to go vote. They're also working multiple jobs. So when you're asking somebody to take 2 to 3 hours to go vote because the line is 4 hours long, that is a burden, and we cannot have that, and we should not have it. We can do it better, and we should continue to do it better. And it's not a Republican or a Democrat issue. Early voting, majority of Nevadans love early voting. We can do better at mail ballots though. Oregon's been doing it for 30 years. They have a really efficient process. When I talk about evaluating our systems and our processes, we have to get better at counting mail ballots. Yes, oh, sorry.
Oh, I agree with that. I think that a lot of people get very disenfranchised and think that the vote doesn't count for anything, or that there's such a small piece of the pie. But I think it's up to the leadership to showcase, no, this is important. You matter, and by having one day dedicated to being able to do that, I think that tells all of Nevadans that their vote is important, and it comes from the leadership and trickles all the way down.
There has to be trust, right? And how do you build that trust between elected leadership and the voter? And
Good luck.
I know. Again, it goes to my optimism, right? But the other point too on access to the ballot box, Our native communities have increased their participation by 25%, and that's significant. Because that's a voice that never has been realized or counted. And the fact that mail ballots have allowed that to occur because a tribal member no longer has to drive 2 hours, 3 hours to the voting site. And nor does the county have to accept the expenditure of putting up a voting site that's going to be used by 10 voters when this can accomplish the same goal. Yes, sir. I promise you're not.
This is a shift topic. Obviously, elections are a very important part in for the office of the Secretary of State, but a larger role of the Secretary of State is dealing with businesses and in the state of Nevada. And you watch Board of Examiners meetings, Secretary Sagaski is always commenting if they have the Nevada license or not. So I guess one question for me is, outside of elections, what would be one of your policy priorities if you were elected to this office?
Since this is being recorded, I will be stopped. I normally say I'd like to trash silver from and start from the beginning. Is really understand what we need to accomplish from a government perspective, and then understand the end user's point of view. So when I did my startup company, we built the technology before we really understood what the end user's experience was. And once we started to really get business and understand, and our volume increased, we really saw that end user experience change. And we thought we're really doing a disservice to our customer, and we need to scrap what we built and start over. And I think that's where we are with Silver Flume. I think it's understanding what we need to get from a government perspective, and then figure out how do we get that information in the most efficient, user-friendly way. So. And I know it costs money. However, my argument is, any of us as business owners would say, if something generated $200 million in revenue for me, I'm going to continue to invest in that system, because the more profit margin on that product is probably 98%, right? And who wouldn't want that product to be strong and viable, and to be able to take our business back from Idaho and Wyoming, so that we are increasing our fees, and then maybe be able to decrease the fees with an increase in volume, because there is an equilibrium there.
Would you have your staff go to work?
What's that?
Would you have your team be at work in their offices?
Oh, I think yes. Look, and I think it's proven with my school, like, we were one of the first schools in Las Vegas to be back to in-person, because that human engagement and that social interaction is so critical. Even though young minds, it was still critical to that student success. And I think it's the same in an office environment. Like, being a startup, it's very frustrating. We have team members all over the country. But if we had that engagement on a daily basis, we could move so much more faster. Yes, sir. Sorry.
It's okay. I'll just comment on Silver Flume and then a question. So as a nonprofit organization, I always found it very difficult, because it always seemed like, oh, you're a nonprofit, so you need to do the old fashioned way. Could never use for the Silver Flume. So very frustrated from that. But what have you learned in your campaigning as far as the differences from the different communities, north, south, rural, urban? And then secondary, what have you learned, I would imagine, as you're learning from other states that, like you mentioned Oregon, but I like what they're doing. We should be thinking about that here.
Yeah, north and south, obviously there's lots of differences. But to be honest with you, I think the north has done a really good job in diversification from an economic standpoint. I went to see somebody who's made a big real estate investment here in the Reno area. He actually did the largest bond offering in the state of Nevada's history recently. And I said, well, when are you going to come to the south? And he said, I'm not going to the south. And I said, why? And I was so offended. But he goes, because the economy in the north is so different from the south. The south is still heavily dependent on gaming, whereas the north has really figured out how to diversify themselves. And the risk is less for me as a real estate developer than it is in the south. Because when gaming crashes, gaming crashes. Some of the differences, obviously water, right? The perspective of water. Water is a huge issue. Being in Fallon and talking to some of those farmers and those ranchers. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona. We have water issues. They had water issues my entire life there. Moving to Las Vegas, again, water issues. Even though Las Vegas has done a great job on per capita use of water, it's still an economic development issue. What are we going to do to attract businesses to know that they can still operate? And hearing what the business perspective is, and then learning what a rancher's and a farmer's perspective is on water and how it impacts their feed, their cattle. I mean, it's just it's a cycle, and I was just sitting there in complete shock because it's a perspective I've never learned, but it was good to have. This is gonna be another, growing up in Tucson, is very similar to Reno. And I think you have a really strong community focus. You're centered around the university. University is feeding the community, talk to each other. And I find that really rewarding and really warming. Yes.
I feel like I have a question, maybe you
Yeah.
on that. So, we actually only have 5 students, well,
Oh, geez.
your apologies. But that's okay, you can still chat after today, I presume.
Well, thank you all for being here. I really appreciate it. It makes me feel good that people actually care about this office. I'm excited about it. When I decided really to run for this, I didn't realize it was going to elevate to the position that it is. This has become a national race. Las Vegas is the most expensive media market in the country now because of Catherine's competitiveness of her race. We've raised record amounts of money. We've raised $2.4 million, which last cycle, 2 candidates together raised 1.1 million. And I'm scared as heck because this is such a close race, but it goes to the 24 election. We are a battleground state. We are going to determine who the next president of the United States is. And I think we all want to be proud of that selection, whether it's a Democrat, Republican, or a nonpartisan. But we need to know that the person administrating that election is honest, transparent, and gonna be direct with people calling a strike and a ball, and we gotta move on. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, but I think Courtney says you have to walk through
Yes.
that door for like 5 minutes and then
Yes.
we'll just get out of here.
Gotta go do a quick fundraiser.
You only have 2.4 people.
I wouldn't think.
I